Hi everyone, and welcome to the next video. This time I thought we'd look at a classic and very famous game from the Romantic era of attacking chess. It was played between Adolf Anderssen with white and Dufrense, both top players of the day. Anderssen had white and opened with e4, and Dufrense responded symmetrically with e5. And after knight f3, attacking the e-pawn, so knight c6 defending it, Anderssen played bishop c4, and we have the Italian game, which was popular at the time, but over the passage of the years has been found to be weaker than the Rue Lopez with bishop b5 here, although it's still seen at all levels, bishop c4. Dufrense responded with one of the main lines, bishop c5, which invites the Evans Gambit with b4. So what is white up to here? The Evans Gambit was discovered and first used by Captain William Davis Evans, a Welshman, in 1827, and it has never been completely refuted. It even occasionally surfaces at the very highest levels. Garry Kasparov, for instance, used it to defeat the current world champion Vishy Anand in 1995. The point of sacrificing this pawn is that after the main line bishop takes b4, white can play c3 and d4, establishing a good center and with tempo. And if instead knight takes b4 here, either bishop b2 or c3 give white good compensation already, and it makes more sense for black to take with the bishop on b4, as the knight needs to defend the e5 pawn here anyway from the knight on f3. That pressure is still within the position, of course. So after b4 and bishop takes b4 comes c3, which gains a tempo on the bishop and prepares d4 next to create the ideal pawn center, as well as allowing the queen to come to b3 for pressure on the sensitive f7 pawn, as well as b7. And black has several moves to choose from here, of course, but there are only a couple of squares for the bishop that are worth considering. Dufrense moved it to a5, and the other main possibility is e7, which Anand played against Kasparov at this point in their game in 1995. Moving to c5 instead merely loses another tempo after d4, and d6 as a square for the bishop is impractical because it restricts the movement of black's d-pawn, which he'll want to advance soon in order to liberate his game. And a5 has the added advantage of creating a pin on the c-pawn here if the d-pawn was to move, which hinders that advance a little. So it's always been the most popular move, bishop a5, and theory has shown, however, that white can still play d4 here, and Anderssen did so with d4. And the point is that after e takes d4, white can castle, breaking the pin and sacrificing a second pawn if black wants to accept it, which Anderssen did. And Dufrense chose to give the pawn back at this stage instead with d3, because this c-pawn here is stopping the knight from going to c3, which is where he'd like to go, and black has already won a pawn in the opening phase of the game, and as well as that he's fractured the white pawn structure. So all things considered, this seems like a well thought out continuation. If instead d takes c3, then the queen b3, adding pressure to f7 is best. But after simply queen f6, black is doing very well, and it's hard for white to either generate attacking chances or demonstrate any meaningful compensation for the material other than psychological pressure. And this is somewhat similar to the game continuation anyway. If we go back to it, after d3 came queen b3, and Anderssen doesn't want to win back the pawn immediately, but instead elects to pile pressure onto the black position. as before on f7, and Dufrense defended with queen f6, which allows white to play e5 with tempo because black is still fine after queen g6, which is a good attacking post that has the added benefit of defending the d3 pawn as well as f7. And the pawn can be taken here, of course, but if knight takes e5, white is doing excellently after rook e1, pinning the knight. So d6 appears to make sense, but now comes bishop g5, where best play continues queen f5, but now knight takes e5, d takes e5, and queen b5 check is forking the king and the loose a5 bishop, but the black queen has pressure on the g5 bishop, meaning that white can't win a piece here. But he has better than doing that anyway, because after black's best response c6 comes rook takes e5 check, which is forking the king and the queen. And but the problem with this move is that if the queen is to fall, then black can win white's queen on the next move. And because of that, king d7 can be played here and is the best move, but now white has queen c5 threatening to mate with the rook e7 check as well as capture the queen, and black has no satisfactory way to deal with both threats, so here he's totally busted. The computer gives an advantage of close to 7 pawns, so it's game over. And this would have been a very reckless line for black to choose, of course, but it does demonstrate some of the danger in the position if black isn't careful. Okay, back to the game continuation. So we had g6 after e5, and Anderssen continued with rook e1, moving his rook to the open file and taking aim at the black king and overprotecting his somewhat weak e-pawn. And white maintains the pressure here, but for the moment at least he has no concrete threats on the black position or the black king or anything like that. And Dufrense continued naturally and logically with knight g e7, getting another piece into the game and preparing to castle. He can't play the knight out to f6 due to the pawn on e5, of course, and f6 would be the ideal square for the knight, but this fact alone is certainly not enough compensation for the 2 pawns that white has sacrificed. The pressure and rapid development here amounts to roughly a pawn in compensation according to the computer, although it's almost certainly possible for white to win the d3 pawn by force, so any compensation is essentially academic as far as the computer is concerned. Another feature of the Evans Gambit is white's ability to play bishop a3, and the dark square bishop of black has been moved to the queen side, so this is going to be a very nice diagonal for the bishop from a3. And normally this move is more effective as it prevents black from castling, and this bishop, as I said, has been committed to the queen side from the early phase of the game. So in this case it's not quite as bad because the knight's moved to e7, so there's no pin preventing castling, or the action of the bishop isn't preventing castling. Although it will mean that the rook will be pinned on e8 if black was to castle now. And Anderssen was probably expecting Dufrense to castle now, and he would be able to hopefully use that pin to some advantage, but Dufrense had other ideas and played here instead b5. An unusual looking move, and it's important to remember that this was the romantic era of chess where attack was the only thing that mattered. Nowadays almost all top players would have simply castled instead and played happily into the middle game, at least a pawn up, hoping to simplify to a winning endgame. In the 19th century such play was deemed to lack flair and even seen as cowardly, but the computer agrees that simply castling would have rendered black a comfortable edge. So what is Dufrense up to here? His main goal, it appears, is simply to open the B file for activity, as well as reducing the pressure on f7. Bishop takes b5 is not advisable thanks to rook b8, which is going to pin the bishop and give white some problems to solve. So Anderssen played the correct move. Queen takes b5, allowing rook b8 with tempo, and a4 is the only viable move for the queen. Moving to c5 instead is very problematic after bishop b6, which Dufrense played now anyway, as the queen is exerting some pressure on the black bishop, and black wants to castle and create attacking chances himself. And at the moment he can't castle thanks to bishop takes e7, where there's no knight takes e7 or queen takes b6 follows. And queen takes a5 follows. So bishop b6 at this stage is again logical and sound, and that's what Dufrense played. And next came knight b d2, which is a natural developing move, seeing as c3 is not available for the knight. And after black having developed his knight to e7, it's not controlling e4 as it would be from f6, so white has the attractive option of a later knight e4, which is a very strong central post for the knight. It would also block the queen's protection of the g3 pawn, the d3 pawn. If it was on e4, the bishop can take on d3, if white desires that, and setting up some tactical tricks. So slowly white is gaining compensation for his sacrificed material, but that's only possible because Dufrense gave a pawn back and chose not to castle. And here he got his other bishop into the game with bishop b7, which was, we can presume, another of the ideas behind his b5 pawn sacrifice. He could have safely castled here instead, but preferred to get more pieces involved. And both sides have developed their bishops very aggressively, and there's a lot of power waiting to be unleashed in the position. Anderssen now made use of the e4 square as indicated by moving his knight there, and Dufrense played one of the first inaccuracies of the game with a queen f5. And it's unclear what his thinking was behind this move, perhaps to add pressure to f3 after the c6 knight moves in conjunction with the bishop on b7, and also on f2 in conjunction with this bishop. And he also has in mind to move his queen to h5 on the next move to keep up the pressure on the king and also the e5 pawn. Probably better was d2, as white is going to win the d-pawn anyway, and this at least forces white to undevelop a little bit with knight e takes d2, though it remains unclear how black should continue from here. He is again unable to castle without dropping his d-pawn, now that the bishop has moved to b7. If he castles here, there's bishop takes e7, knight takes e7, and queen takes d7. But he could try something unorthodox and dynamic instead, such as advancing his kingside pawns. Might be interesting. But anyway, the move he played was queen f5, and the downside of this move is that bishop takes d3, which is what Anderssen played, aims the bishop at the queen, and there's an immediate threat of a knight d6 check, which is going to pick up the queen. And Dufrense presumably had seen this, and he played queen h5 for the reasons I already indicated. Playing instead knight takes e5, just knight is loose, simply allows the tactic knight d6 check with a discovered attack on the queen. White is winning easily after c takes d6, and bishop takes f5, of course. So queen h5, and now a typically romantic move from Anderssen, knight f6 check. And although this move is flashy and sharp, it's not the best continuation. Better was rook a1, where it becomes very hard for black to continue, and his queen's in danger of getting trapped with knight g3 coming next. We can look at a couple of lines to demonstrate the difficulty. Let's say black plays a6 here,